Did you know something new is invented every 10 minutes? Join us as we speak to the innovators reinventing our world here on planet Earth and far, far beyond. Welcome to GTWN Now, a podcast brought to you by the Global Telecom Women's Network and sponsored by CMS Global. GTWN Now introduces the movers and the makers at the cutting edge of technology who are committed to keeping us all connected. In each episode, we invite a leading expert to share her experience building life-changing inventions in places and spaces that don't yet exist, and the inspiration they must muster to tackle the impossible. We also ask our guests to share tips, tools, and strategies to reach your own moonshot. I'm your host, Rosali Gitau, founder of Bixi FinTech for Women and Global Telecom Women's Network International Board member. Welcome to GTWN Now. Hello, and welcome to another episode of GTWN Now. Today's episode is going to focus on space for all of humanity. I am so excited to talk about this very pertinent topic, and there are few people in the world who have impacted the development of space as much as our guest today, Candace Johnson. Candace was born into a family where her father worked on the first satellites for the US government. He spearheaded the world's first private satellite system and was lent by the US Air Force to the White House to work on the Apollo mission. Candace has always felt that space was not only her destiny, but that all of humanity should have access to space, and it should be accessible to all. Candace is decorated by the Luxembourg and German governments, respectively, as commander and officer of their respective orders of merit. She's the recipient of Lifetime Achievement Awards from the World Communications Awards, the Global Telecom Women's Network, and the International Alliance for Women, just to name a few. Candace also graduated from such prestigious universities as Stanford, the Sorbonne, and Vassar, and has just always been guided by a strong sense of personal responsibility. Join us for this fascinating podcast as Candace traces her personal journey in space and how it has led her to her current conviction and mission to ensure space for all of humanity. Candace, welcome to the show.
Rosalia, it is such a pleasure to be here giving this podcast for the GTWN Now, which you have been so instrumental in bringing us about for this new generation. And I am delighted to speak with our listeners and our viewers about space for all of humanity. I have a very personal journey with regards to space. And I thought I would share with you for the viewers. So in 1957, this is the Sputnik that was, launched. It is a perfect replica of the Sputnik. And when I was 5, though, that was 1957, I didn't receive that. I received this. A flying saucer with Christmas, with Santa Claus inside to hang on the Christmas tree. And I've just taken it off my Christmas tree to show you that tonight. So you can see that from a very, very early age on, I was inspired by space and all that it could do. And I also, Rosalia has talked a little bit about my father, but can you imagine my best friend when I was 8 was my father's friend who was 60, and he had the largest ham radio station in the United States. And I used to go every Sunday and call around the world behind the Iron Curtain to places that I had never even heard of before. And when I was 10, which was 1962, when indeed my dad was at the White House, He came and he talked to my fifth grade class about how satellites would help us give entertainment, give education, help us with the weather prediction, and also with communications. And that one day, if we had wars, we would have wars in space and peace on Earth. Now, we still don't have the peace, but we do have wars in space, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I think, as you can see, it is a very, very personal relationship to space, and I've grown up with space, and space has grown up with me.
That is the most incredible story. Couldn't be more time pertinent as well. It is the Christmas season, and your UFO ornament. I don't know if you follow the dialogue of what's happening on the internet, so the kind of ephemeral version of space here on Earth, but there is quite a lot of talk and discussion about unidentified flying objects as well. So I think you're absolutely part of the zeitgeist, as is your ornament. And I really, I this when you mentioned your destiny, I think few could argue that, a woman in possession of a spacecraft, as a 5-year-old ornament, isn't destined to lead in exactly that industry. So that was really, really amazing to hear. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on what Space for All looks like, because right now, also part of the zeitgeist, we're seeing that there is this kind of space race 2.0 going on, that everybody is very concerned with it. You talk about wars, wars in space. Some might call them Star Wars. That these are becoming increasingly part of the discussion. So I'd love to hear maybe a counter to that narrative, that it's not all about fighting in space, but what can space actually do for a person like me, our listeners, a woman, in Tuvalu? What can space mean for us?
So, it's so interesting, Rosalia, because I have always kind of described my life in space as first using space to provide universal access, then provide using space to access the universe. And then just most recently, in fact, when you and I first met, I have been working on networks for the universe. So let us talk first about, providing universal access. So already, I had this mission that space and telecommunications and freedom of choice should be for all. And so when I was 23, I first started the United States. I think it was one of the first satellite broadcasting networks. We were not going directly to the satellite dishes and to the televisions. We were doing what we called rooftop to rooftop. And I have 5 degrees in music. So I was the director, executive producer of a classical music radio station and then a very large syndicate. And I said, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be sending bicycling tapes, which is what we were doing. We should be sending these programs over satellite. And so that's what I did. And then in 1982, 1 year after I had married my husband, the ambassador of Luxembourg to the United States, who, by the way, was also a musician, Luxembourg, the tiny little country of Luxembourg, had 3 crises. They had a broadcast crisis, they had a steel crisis, and they had a monetary union crisis with Belgium. And so the Prime Minister, Mr. Pierre Werner, also one of the fathers of the Euros, was looking for a fourth pillar. And so, having grown up in space, having seen what I could already do in space in the United States, I told the Prime Minister, and I did what I always tell entrepreneurs to do: write 2 pages and give it to somebody who you think can help. And so I told the Prime Minister, I said, Luxembourg could start a space economy and you could have a private satellite system. And he said, Candace, this is great, but we don't have anybody to do who knows about space and satellites. And I said, well, I do. And so at age 30, 1983, the prime minister called me from the United States and said, I need you to now make this satellite system happen. And it's hard, Rosalia, because we talk about universal access today and we talk about freedom of choice. But at that time, there were broadcast monopolies and they were all government owned. And so, it was the French government telling the French people what they should read and write and listen to. In Germany, it was the German government telling the Germans what they should listen to and watch. And it was the same in every single one of the European countries, except for Luxembourg and the UK. The UK had a biopoly, so they had a duopoly. But Luxembourg, because it was so small, it spoke all of the languages. All Luxembourgers speak French, German, Luxembourgish, and English. And so they had a private broadcasting franchise for RTL, Radio Television Luxembourg, and they broadcast in 4 languages from their little place in Luxembourg. And so, this idea of freedom of choice and being able for all Europeans to look and see what they wanted to see on television, to be able to receive French programs in Germany. And of course, let us not forget that in 1983, when we first started SES, Société Européenne des Satellites, the company which I helped found and make the world's largest satellite system, that in 1983, of course, there was a line drawn between Europe, Western Europe, and Eastern Europe. But, the beautiful thing about space and satellites is that you can create your own zone. And so from the beginning, we anticipated that we would be covering all of Europe, not half of Europe, but all of Europe. And when the wall fell down in 1988, we were the first ones, no, I'm sorry, 1989. When the wall fell down in 1989, we had launched our satellite 11 months earlier, and we were the only ones who could cover all of Europe. And everybody, all of the Eastern Europeans, wanted to be able to watch Western television. And so this idea of universal access then brought me to be doing Teleport Europe. So it was Europe's first private satellite telecommunications company. It was for B2B, so it was for companies who could go from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, and they could make European-wide companies. It then led me to do Iridium. So Iridium was the first commercial satellite system for mobile communications. And so this was in 1994 when we were first starting it. And it really is the precursor of Starlink and of OneWeb. So, always kind of being a little bit ahead of the game. Also then in 1994, a little bit later, I started Europe Online. So it was that time, it was the world's first internet network, and then it became the world's first broadband satellite internet network. And in 1995, I did ILS, International Launch Services. So you can see my Proton rocket over here. There it is. And I was in Russia on April 9th, 1995, when we launched the first joint venture between Khrushchev in Russia and Lockheed Martin in the United States. And, here again, when we look at everything today, I am sad. I also worked on Soyuz to make that cooperation between Arianespace and Energia go well. I am sad that we do not have the access to space with the Russians that we had worked so long on. And I'll just kind of stop this little paragraph here. So I think you can see that whether it was satellite television, whether it was satellite telecommunications, whether it was satellite mobile, whether it was satellite internet, whether it was launchers, I was always striving to have universal access, to make people who had never been able to communicate, to have them have universal communications.
That is a really incredible journey. And again, it sounds very destined in terms of timing. Um, but one of the things we've the theme of this GTWN series has been digital humanity. And so we've been exploring how the digital age is affecting humanity and vice versa. And one of the things that has come up regularly is there are still at least a billion, if not more, people who on this planet are not connected, right? So and you've done so many initiatives to realize universal access for all. But why is it that still, 1 out of 8 people still don't have access? What are the impediments? And
Well,
what do you hope that you can inspire in the listeners or anybody listening? Like, what can we do to really close that gap?
so, first of all, I honestly do think that, today it's so wonderful because you can put up your own satellite, you can make your own launcher. And by the way, I just would like to point out that every single, um, project that I just described was never government sponsored. I did everything privately financed, market oriented, and commercially oriented. And I think that that is an important thing for everybody to understand that it, it really, people thought it was for, space was for the governments. No, space is for people,
Mm.
and you can be an entrepreneur. And so, imagine a 30-year-old woman, saying, okay, well, I'm now going to create a first private transporter satellite system for the world
Mm.
and not even thinking about it. And so, 12 years ago, a group of women and I in the, you talked about Tuvalu earlier, we got together in the Pacific and we created Oceania Women's Network Satellite. And we put together, women from all around the Pacific, together, by the way, with the Global Telecom Women's Network. And we created Oceania Women's Network Satellite. And we sent out an RFP and we found a beautiful satellite system called Pacific, which is bringing today high throughput broadband internet to 25 different island countries in the Pacific. And so, these are villages, these are schools, these are hospitals, these are governments. And, it really is our greatest joy. And we just got together and we said, look, there is a need and we need to do this. Some people could, put in $50. Some people could put in $50,000, but we all came together and we put our money together and we bootstrapped it really, but we did it. And today it is the same thing. And so what I'm always trying to do is to tell everyone, if you see a need, try to figure out what you can do to, to provide a solution to that need. And particularly when we're talking about our world today and the fact that we have the Internet of Things. So, and that everything is wireless. So whether it's mobile communications, whether it is tower communications, whether it is space, actually all of this is converging. And so we should be able to make very, very good communication networks and to cover all of the world, those people who are not covered. And so definitely this is something that I am working very hard on. But if I may, I'd also like to talk a little bit about this, going from universal access to accessing the universe.
I was just
Because
going to ask you that.
okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, because now with the climate change, with the environment, with food and water scarcity, we need to use space to also provide the people on our planet with not only communications, but with solutions that will help them when these extreme weather conditions come, when there is drought, when there is no food, etc., when there is a pipeline leak, when the oceans are, are being unfortunately polluted with plastic, etc. And today we can use satellites to do exactly the same thing that we did with communications. We just put sensors on everything, the Internet of Things, and we can then gather the data via satellite. We can bring that data down, we can analyze it with AI, and we can provide insights that will help people make solutions to have a better planet and a better life.
So I'm just thinking out loud and, having had conversations, particularly, I think it's really interesting, our conversation about space, and you provided so much helpful tips to entrepreneurs. You'd mentioned bootstrapping, kind of having your elevator pitch ready, right place, right time. If somebody says, who can do this? And, raising your hand, you still apply this in an industry that's seemingly daunting. It's seemingly, oh, you have to have $1 billion. But like you rightly point out, you can launch a satellite in space for a fraction of that cost, or you can pool your resources with people who have a shared interest in addressing a problem. um, it sounds like it is possible to kind of almost bootstrap yourself into fixing problems here on Earth
Yeah.
by leveraging space. But I'm almost wondering, how is it, should we be moving a little bit faster as entrepreneurs? Because every time I turn around, I see, go Falcon, go Starlink. And um I wonder if this is a little bit of a race against time. And if it is, like, what are the top three problems here on Earth that space can help with that you think are not being adequately addressed by the big players right now? So, one of our interviewers in this series, he mentioned stories. So much of space. Yes, it's not entirely government business, but it is. It's a government kind of has to justify their costs related with space, and being able to communicate the why and why this is important for everybody is missing. What are the top three problems that nobody's addressing right now that entrepreneurs should just get started on?
Ooh. Um, I think that, whereas I used to say that we have, we can use space to give universal access, and we can use space to access the universe. I think that because space truly has become so omnipresent and such a part of our daily lives. Let us not forget the GPS, that it
Mm.
is tied to every single, navigation system in the world. Let us
I
not
would
also
quite literally be lost without it. I have no
yeah,
sense of direction.
exactly. Yeah, no. Let us not forget that the GPS is also tied to all of the financial transactions in the world, um, let us not forget that, you know, as we go forward, autonomous driving, all of this would not be possible without GPS. So I think that is one thing. But all of those systems and the communication systems and, the LEOs, the low Earth orbit satellite systems that I talked about, starting with Iridium, And then, going to, oh, by the way, so here's my, if you can believe it, it's my crystal ball for iridium, for
Gonna
iridium, there
say,
you
like,
go.
give our listeners an edge.
1994. And, but I think now our biggest problem is actually access to space.
Mhm,
Yes, because this is fundamental. And
mhm,
it's not only access to space for um for uh, all of the things we've just talked about, but it's also access to the frequencies and to the
mhm.
orbital positions.
Yes, it
And you did mention, the space race. And actually already, Rosalia, I have started 3.5 years ago to write articles, to point out that we must be very careful because I do see a colonization of
Mhm,
space.
mhm,
And I am very worried about this, but you don't worry. It was like my brother, he's my older brother, and he always had to protect me because I was always, breaking monopolies and things like this. And he said, "Oh no, Candace, are you now going to get Elon Musk on your back?" And I said, "Well, Stephen, somebody has to do it. But it's not a question of going against Elon Musk because he's done great things. What it is a question of is inspiring young people and emerging spacefaring nations to say, hey, I can do this. I want to use my frequencies to and my orbital positions
yes,
to use space to solve my problems, which
yes.
may not be the other problems of the other people in the world. So this is why here again, it's kind of coming full circle, is that I really have to fight now for access to space and access to space and to humanity, and to all of humanity. This is so important. We cannot let one country, or two or three countries for that matter, dominate space when it really has to be accessible to all. And young people can do this. They can say, wow, I want to build a satellite system to do precision agriculture for my country. I want to do a satellite system to provide weather, all of this to provide communications, etc. And we also then, we need to look now what is happening in space, so what I call, space in space and these networks for the universe. But I'll stop here and let you ask some questions.
No, I think I don't want you to stop. I think you've just raised such a phenomenally important issue. I think a lot of, based on my conversations, in this series, I think a lot of space exploration very much it has a feeling reminiscent of, going on Columbus getting on a ship and discovering the new world, right? And this rush to stake your claim. And so, this call to get involved is so important. And one of the things that I've also learned that I didn't know is that a lot of, non-Western countries are heeding that call. I recently met with the Philippine Space Agency. I'm a Filipina. I did not know that this existed. I met with the Thailand Space Agency. Again, I live in Thailand. I did not know this existed. And it was based on these conversations and these meetings that I learned about things as important as orbital position, easiest places to launch a satellite, really jockeying for, you want that prime equator space, right? These are all, and that has value in a lot of these countries. Not to
Yeah.
mention, a lot of these countries are the most impacted by climate change. So it's really important that they be able to elbow their way into, a position that helps them in space here on Earth. So I think it's such an important point to make, that this call of getting involved, I think space often seems like, oh, that's the least of our concerns, right? Like we have so many more immediate and pertinent concerns. But to your point, it's almost like if you don't have a foot in the game at this point, it might get too late. There's satellites, hundreds, thousands being launched every single day, and there's only a certain amount of room. And I think it's such an important point. And just like exploration into the new world, if you're not getting involved, you'll find yourself very much on the outside of it, and not able to necessarily, and all of the attendant challenges that came henceforth with colonization. So I'm so glad you raised that point. I think what you're really saying is like we need a diversity of private actors, we need a diversity of government actors, and not for the purposes of DEI, but truly because we are so many people on this planet and we need to all be involved. I had a really interesting conversation. You're one of the few women who have been working in the space industry since the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And and I have heard from many, interestingly enough, men who work in the space industry who are they're not saying it out of a DEI requirement. They're like, we need more women working in space. And when you inquire as to why, they're like, the business case, we need to understand how women's bodies are affected in microgravity environment. Like there's this need to really understand how humanity,
Yeah.
particularly the other half of humanity, operates, in space. So I think what I really like to see is, it's one thing, like obviously approaching space from an entrepreneurial point of view, but I think it would be really, in our show notes, we'll try and include some of these kind of lower end resources. You're on the board of space related early stage startup, venture funds, things like that, just bringing an awareness so that entrepreneurs in different industries know that they can get involved. I also think it's really important, based on your biography, you did mention, yes, I grew up in space, but I think what's interesting is the tipping point of your career in space wasn't necessarily your father. It was you were working a job based in the
Yeah.
music industry, and you saw a problem and you
Yeah.
thought, why are we riding bicycles around with like tapes or whatever? Like there is a better solution to this. So
Yeah.
I think these aha moments can come to people who've never had any experience with space,
Yeah.
myself included. I have never had any experience with space until my entrepreneurial endeavor. We had connectivity issues, and this is how this conversation came about, where we want to work with last mile
Yeah.
communities who don't have access to the internet.
Absolutely. And that was, I mean, and that is why I, I mean, when I do mentoring for young entrepreneurs, space entrepreneurs, so many times they come with the technological solution, but not with the market-oriented solution. And also, quite frankly, my mother always said you have to survive to be great. So, you need to make money and you need to have a return on investment. And from the very, very beginning, Rosalia, it never occurred to me that people weren't doing space to make money, because you have to make money. You have to survive. You have to be able, to pay for the launcher, pay for the satellites, pay for the ground stations, pay for everything. So I think that um, the problems, unfortunately, that the world is facing, be that um, you know all of the SDGs, actually education, communication, poverty, drought, famine, etc. Actually, all of these can be solved by using space. And so I think that that is a call to everyone to say, please look look to the skies and see what you can do. And Luxembourg had 400,000 people, when it started SES, when we started in 1983. And yet we became the world's largest satellite system. I mean, this is amazing from a little country. And so I think I really, I really believe it is making people aware. And so that's kind of what I'm doing, in my next mission. And is really making people aware, making governments aware, making entrepreneurs aware, making investors aware, that space can provide a solution. And I'd also just like to kind of say two things before I think then we will close. Um, you know, um, Very funnily, when Fortune was doing an article on me, they and by the way, when they said we wanted to do an article on you, I said, well, that's fine, but I would like to get the young women space entrepreneurs into this article. And so, at a time when these young women, 35, 40 years old, really needed to be in Fortune, I was able to get them in Fortune, and that was probably my biggest joy. But the journalist at the beginning, she said, "Well, I guess space tourism is driving this renaissance in space." I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "What is driving the renaissance is space, is the need for more communications, is the need for weather prediction, is the need for precision agriculture, it is the need for emergency, communications, etc. And so that is, and more the need for the GPS, what I was talking about, the financial um, infrastructure, etc. People don't realize that their life really does depend so much of what is going on in space now. And if we look a little bit to the future, and this is so exciting. Really, I think that the James Webb Telescope was definitely, a breakthrough moment for humanity, because for the first time we could talk about the origins of our life on
Mhm.
and planet, and that therefore, instead of talking about deep space or near space where satellites are, or the planet Earth, we can now talk about one space, and one space, for all of humanity. And so for these networks for the universe, um, I am looking at indeed having energy networks so that we would have, space-based solar power. I'm
Absolutely.
looking at data networks on the moon, the data centers on the moon, the need for all of the computing power for AI, etc. It is so huge that we need to put these huge data centers somewhere else where we don't have to spend so much time and energy and money, cooling them down. We can look at new types of communication networks. So really, if we are on Mars, and I would like to say everything that space exploration is being done today, be it for Mars, be it for asteroids, be it for Moon, my feeling is it should always be to benefit, our mothership Earth. And so when people may be at Mars, they will need to communicate. And so we
Yes.
will have to have digital twins. We will have to have, the metaverse, probably one of the best uses of the metaverse. Need to have logistic networks. We will need to have transport networks, new materials. What is going on with new materials is so exciting and can really bring us forward as robotics. And so there really is a huge, a huge benefit for our humanity, for the Earth, to be working in space and to use it and to develop the resources. And that is why I wrote together with my friends from EBAN, European Business Angel Network, I wrote a manifesto for a clean, safe, equitable, and peaceful space for all. And we owe this to humanity and to all of humanity to make certain that we keep space clean, safe, equitable, and peaceful.
Yeah. If I may bother you for 2 more seconds, I would love to get your thoughts. You say you have the manifesto written. A manifesto in action is a law. Where's the entry point for all the lawyers out there, myself included? What's the entry point legally to address some of these challenges that you've just raised? Is it the
So,
Artemis Accord? Is it where do we go? Is it the
you
UN?
know, I think it is the law that we have on Earth. Um, you know, I will share with you that, and it's so fun because, as I say, when I grew up in space, I was able to meet amazing people like,
Only the
Baron.
most amazing people are working on space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, amazing. I mean, Werner von Braun, to start with, the gentleman where you would go every Sunday to call around the world on his ham radio station. He was the father of Northrop Grumman. So Vinton Cerf, I grew up with Vint Cerf, the father of the internet. He worked on the ARPANET. So when my dad was a general in the United States Air Force. So, and by the way, at the time, he already planned dot Earth, dot Mars, dot Venus. He's just such a beautiful, beautiful person. But one of the people that I also met was a gentleman named Del Smith. And Del was really one of the first space lawyers. And when two satellites were put into the wrong Earth orbit, Dell hired the space shuttle in 1984 to go and get the satellites, to bring them down to Earth, to refurbish them, and to sell them. And, when I told this to young people, recently I was in Saudi Arabia at the Space Debris Conference, which they did, and where I'm a member of the International Advisory Board of the Saudi Space Agency. They were amazed because this is what they want to do. And I said, well, it's already done. And when I spoke with Dell about it, he said, Candace, we did not need to write any new space laws. We did need to write commercial laws.
Mhm.
And so I think that, the fathers and the mothers of, the 1967 space law was, that they really were quite advanced in their thinking. I think that, I did try also 3.5 years ago to get people to do a new space convention, just like we had the law of the sea. I was told that, Candace, don't go there. It's just not going to happen. You know me, I never give up, never accept no for an answer, and never go away. So I'm definitely going to try this again. But I think that there's nothing today that will stop the progress. And for me to say that is really something because I always said regulation never stopped anything good from happening. And I really do think that there's nothing today that would stop the progress that we are making to use space to make a better world and a better planet and, for us all.
Well, that's encouraging to know. So it's still wide open. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective today. It's, obviously it's a very personal journey that you've shared, a very knowledgeable journey, and a call to action. So I'm going to include all of these things that you've mentioned, the Fortune article, your manifesto in our show notes. And we'll absolutely keep track and keep our listeners updated on your progress getting a convention for space underway, because you never give up. So thank you so much. And we really look forward to seeing space truly become space for all. So thank you so much for your work, and we look forward to seeing what you accomplish in the near future, here or in the planet, in space. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rosalia.
I want to thank our guest for joining today's episode of GTWN Now, and give a big thank you to our sponsors, CMS Global, for making this episode possible. Today's podcast will be available on our website, gtwn.org, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified when new episodes drop. I'm your host, Rosalia Gitau, GTWN International Board Member, wishing you a week of wonder.